The day I lost my mother, my son locked me out again. It felt like my heart was being suffocated, smothered by something I couldn't escape. The air was thick, almost unbearable, as if the world itself had taken one sharp, decisive breath before expelling me, leaving me outside, exposed, unworthy. I remember the moment like it was an out-of-body experience. I could see my hand raised, knocking on the door, 3 sharp raps, then silence. My son was inside, somewhere, pretending he couldn't hear me, pretending he didn't know what I had become. The years of tension, unspoken resentment, all came rushing back in that instant, pressing down on me, crushing the small remnants of dignity I had left. It wasn't just a door that separated us, it was the whole life I had lived up to that point, the choices I made, the mistakes I ignored, the love I demanded and twisted into something monstrous. I stood there, staring at the door that would never open again, and I realized, for the first time in my life, that there was nothing left to hold on to. Not my son, not my mother's memory, not even myself. I had always thought I was the one in control, my relationships, my family, my life. But the truth is, I was the puppet, and I had been for years. And when you finally wake up to the strings that have been pulling you, it's like waking from a dream, only to find that the dream is your reality, and the dreamer is gone. But now, with the rain starting to fall, I understood. In the end, I wasn't the mother. I wasn't the protector. I wasn't even the woman I once believed myself to be. I had been an illusion, one I had carefully constructed and held together by force, by manipulation, by the quiet assurance that I could always make things work. Except now, I couldn't. I looked down at my phone, the screen lighting up with a single, cruel message: "Don't come back here." My son, Daniel. A boy who had turned into a man who didn't need me anymore. A man who didn't care. I walked away, my footsteps slowly swallowed by the thickening rain. The sound of my heartbeat was louder than the storm. At that moment, I realized something too cold and cruel to ignore. The worst betrayal in my life wasn't my son locking me out. It was that I had betrayed myself. And I didn't know if I could ever forgive myself for that. The rain poured relentlessly, an uninvited reminder of the world's indifference, the water washing away the dust of a life I no longer recognized. I stood there for a long while, drenched and numb, staring at the glistening pavement. How did it all come to this? The feeling of betrayal wasn't new to me. I had always been betrayed by the people closest to me, my mother, my father, and then my son. But there was something deeper, something more raw about this betrayal. It wasn't just a simple break in trust. No, this was a reflection of my own failures, the mirror held up to the fractured self I had created over the years. When I think back on it, I see the cracks beginning long before that night. The cracks weren't in my relationships with others, they were in me. I had been too consumed by my own guilt, my own warped sense of what family should be, that I failed to see the damage I was causing. The quiet, ever-present storm inside me that no one saw. Not Daniel. Not my mother. Not even myself. It started with my mother. Her death wasn't just the loss of a woman who had raised me, it was the final nail in the coffin of everything I thought I knew about family. The house she left behind felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. I didn't mourn her passing, I mourned the life I thought I had lived with her. In the weeks after her death, I stayed in the house, as though her absence hadn't yet settled in my bones. But the truth is, I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to face the gaping hole she left behind. And Daniel. My son, my pride, my failure. Daniel had always been difficult. Not in the typical teenage rebellion sense. No, his rebellion was quieter, more insidious, like a vine creeping up a wall, unnoticed until it overtook the structure completely. It started when he was younger, little things, like him sneaking off to his room with the door locked, like he'd rather be anywhere else than near me. And I, in my ignorance, chalked it up to him growing up, as if it was all part of the natural progression of parenthood. I didn't see how my own insidious control over him had been strangling him, piece by piece. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the cracks. I stopped noticing his pain. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was just suffocating him under my expectations, under the heavy weight of the love I thought he owed me. It wasn't love, it was manipulation. It was me trying to mold him into the perfect son, the son I needed to heal my broken heart. I wasn't just asking for love. I was demanding it. And when he didn't give it, I retaliated. Quietly, subtly, but with anger I didn't understand. Every cold word, every sharp criticism, every unspoken threat, it was me trying to control him. I didn't realize until much later that the more I pushed, the more he pulled away. And in the end, it wasn't just a fractured relationship, it was a shattered one. That night. The night he locked me out. I had come home, hoping that this time, things would be different. I hadn't expected apologies, but I expected a semblance of understanding, maybe even a gesture of comfort. But instead, I found the door closed, my son's absence palpable in the silence that greeted me. When I knocked, it felt like an eternity passed before I heard anything, nothing but the sound of my own breath, the cold air filling my lungs. I had thought, for a split second, that maybe he was just ignoring me. Maybe he was angry, too. But then, as the seconds dragged into minutes, the truth slowly seeped in, he was done with me. Done with everything I had ever tried to make him into. And in that moment, I realized that his betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness, but a statement of strength. He had finally taken control of his own life, and I was no longer part of it. The worst part? I couldn't even hate him for it. I couldn't hate him because I knew I had taught him how to do it. I had raised him to shut me out. To lock the door and never look back. But the story didn't end there. I should have walked away, should have let the rain wash the guilt and regret from my soul, but I didn't. I stood at the doorstep, soaked to the bone, and felt something stir within me, a strange mixture of rage and revelation. I was betrayed, yes. But in that betrayal, I saw something else, an opportunity. I had spent my entire life being passive, allowing others to control my actions and decisions. I had been molded by the expectations of others, whether it was my mother's subtle dominance or my son's emotional withdrawal. But now, the strings have been cut. I was free. Or at least, I thought I was. I turned away from the door, stepping into the street, letting the cold rain soak my skin. I was angry, yes. But beneath that anger was something deeper, something more dangerous. I realized that in the darkest corners of my grief, I had finally found a purpose. A reason to act. Betrayal was a weapon, and I would wield it like a blade. I didn't know what would come next, but I felt the sharp edge of that possibility, the taste of revenge on my tongue. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. I would no longer be the victim in my own story. I would be the one to write the next chapter. And no one would stop me. The next few days blurred into each other. I let the rain soak into me, let it wash over the part of me that was still clinging to the life I once knew. I didn't go back to the house, not immediately, at least. Instead, I wandered, walking aimlessly through streets I hadn't seen in years. The city felt foreign, as though I had never truly been part of it, but there was something strangely comforting in that. It gave me a sense of distance, of detachment, from everything I had lost. At night, I went to bars, ordered whiskey, and stared blankly at the glass. I didn't drink to escape, I drank to feel something, anything. Every sip was like a momentary release from the weight of my existence. My thoughts spiraled, and I allowed them to, but deep down, I knew I wasn't just running away from my son or my grief. I was running away from myself. I wasn't who I had been. And I wasn't who I wanted to be. But I didn't know who I was anymore. Then, a phone call. "Mom, we need to talk." The voice on the other end was strained, tight. It was Daniel, and hearing his voice sent a shiver through my spine. Part of me, part of the person I used to be, wanted to ignore it, to keep walking away. But another part of me, the new, unfamiliar part, needed this. It was time to confront what had been brewing in the pit of my stomach for so long. So, I answered. "I'm listening," I said, my tone deliberately calm, controlled. I didn't want things to end like that," he said, and I could hear the weight of his words, the fragility of his emotions. "I didn't want to shut you out. I don't know how to deal with all this. Everything that's happened. All the tension between us." His words twisted inside me, an ache that was more than just sadness. It was guilt, shame, and a deep, gnawing hunger for something I couldn't name. "Don't lie to me, Daniel. You locked me out. You cut me out of your life," I said, my voice sharp, biting. I couldn't keep the anger from creeping in. It felt too close to the surface, raw and unfiltered. "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't know what else to do. You were suffocating me. You made me feel like I was just an extension of your needs, of your expectations." There it was. The truth. The one thing I had avoided for so long. My heart pounded in my chest, a fierce, chaotic rhythm that mirrored the storm inside my mind. I had suffocated him. Not just with my love, but with my control, my fear of losing him, my need for validation. I had used him. Not intentionally, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. He had seen through me, seen the cracks I had spent a lifetime hiding. And now, it was too late. "I didn't mean to," I said, my voice trembling. The anger, the hurt, the shame, they all tangled together in a knot that I couldn't untangle. "I never meant to hurt you." Daniel was silent for a moment. Then, his voice cracked. "Mom. I'm just so fucking tired of pretending everything's fine. Of pretending you're okay when you're not. You can't keep doing this to me." His words hit me like a slap. It was the truth. All of it. I had been pretending to be strong, pretending I knew what I was doing. I had been living in a fantasy world of my own making, and Daniel had been the unwilling pawn in it. "I'm not okay, Daniel," I said, my voice softer now, vulnerable. "But I'm trying. I'm trying to figure it out." The silence between us stretched. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter. "I don't know if I can be a part of that anymore." The weight of his words settled on my chest, suffocating me in a way the rain never could. He was right. He was done. And I didn't blame him. But that didn't mean I was ready to give up. Not yet. "I don't need you to forgive me," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "But I need you to understand. I was lost. And I didn't know how to find my way back." There was no answer. Just the soft click of the phone ending the call. And just like that, I was alone again. But this time, something inside me had shifted. The numbness was gone, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. I could feel it in my bones, the slow burn of something darker, something more powerful than anything I had ever felt before. The betrayal wasn't just Daniel's. It was mine too. And I wasn't going to sit idly by and let it consume me. I was done with being the victim. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house. I hadn't been there since her funeral. The house, once filled with warmth and memories, now felt like a mausoleum. I stood in the foyer for a long time, staring at the old photos lining the walls. She had been everything to me, my protector, my guide. But even she had failed me. She had kept me trapped in a web of her own making, never allowing me to breathe, to grow. She was the first to teach me that love was a cage, and I had been its prisoner for too long. I walked through the house, letting the memories flood me. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, a reminder of what I had lost. But it wasn't just the loss of her. It was the loss of everything she had represented. The expectations. The manipulations. The constant demand for perfection. And then, it hit me. I had never been free. Not from my mother. Not from Daniel. Not from myself. But I would be. The house, her house, was mine now. And in that moment, I realized that everything she had built, everything she had tried to control, could be mine to tear down. I had the power now, not just to reclaim what I had lost, but to reshape everything into something I could control. I walked into her study, the one room I had always avoided. There, on the desk, was a stack of papers, old legal documents, photographs, and something else, something that caught my eye. A letter. It was a letter from my mother to me, written years ago, long before her death. The words were harsh, accusatory, filled with a bitterness I had never known. She had written about me, about my failures, about how I would never be able to live up to her expectations. It was the final betrayal, the one that had been building beneath the surface of our relationship for years. I read the letter, each word sinking into me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. This was the beginning. The beginning of something darker, something I couldn't control, but something that would finally give me the strength to take back my life. I folded the letter, slipping it into my pocket. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to become the one who controlled the story. And Daniel? He wasn't going to be the only one who had the power to walk away. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the tension that had been building for weeks, no, for years. The walls seemed to close in on me as I stared at the letter from my mother, my hands trembling slightly, though not with fear. No, it was something more dangerous than fear. It was the realization that I had just unlocked something I hadn't fully understood until now, the power to break free from every lie that had kept me shackled to my past. I had been trapped in this endless cycle of control, first with my mother, then with Daniel. And I had let them dictate the terms of my life. But now, I was the one holding the key. I stood up, the letter clenched in my fist, and walked to the front door of my mother's house. The rain had stopped, but it left the world around me damp and quiet, as if the storm had washed away everything, including my old self. I drove to Daniel's apartment, each mile a drumbeat in my chest. I had rehearsed what I was going to say to him 100 times in my head, but no matter how many times I went over it, I knew it wouldn't be enough. I knew he would resist. He was angry with me, and rightly so. He was hurt, scarred by the years of neglect, the years of emotional manipulation. But none of that mattered anymore. I wasn't coming to beg for forgiveness. I wasn't coming to apologize. I was coming to take control. I parked outside his building, my fingers curling around the steering wheel. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. I didn't know if I could fix things with him, but I was damn sure I would have a say in how they ended. When I knocked on his door, it was almost as if time stood still. I felt every heartbeat, every breath, each one louder than the last. But when he opened the door, I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He wasn't sure if he wanted to face me, but he knew he had to. He always had. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, the walls he'd built between us clear in the way he spoke. "I'm not here to argue, Daniel," I said, cutting him off before he could say anything else. "I'm here because I need you to understand something." He frowned, looking at me like I was a stranger. It was a painful thing to see, to know that my own son no longer recognized me as the woman who raised him, loved him, protected him. "I don't think I have the energy for another one of your lectures," he said bitterly, trying to close the door. But I stopped it with my hand, pressing against the wood, my voice steady. "I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to finally admit the truth." I took a step back, my hands shaking not with fear but with something I couldn't name. I had rehearsed this moment so many times in my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for the weight of it, the rawness of it. This wasn't just about Daniel. This was about me, about owning the truth I had run from for years. "I've been wrong," I said, my voice cracking, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Not just with you, but with myself. I've spent my entire life demanding things from you, love, loyalty, obedience, and I've never stopped to ask if I've ever truly given you any of that. I've been selfish, Daniel. I've been selfish in the way I've held on to you, and I've kept you locked in a cage of my own making. But I won't do it anymore. His eyes searched mine, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze, something that made me think, just for a second, that I could still reach him. But the wall was still there, cold and unyielding. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I continued, my words coming faster now, as if the floodgates had been opened. I'm not even asking you to understand. But I am asking you to see me, really see me, for the first time in years. I'm not your mother anymore. I'm just a woman who's finally come to terms with what she's done. I saw his jaw tighten, his chest rising and falling with a sharp breath. The emotional tension between us was palpable, an invisible line pulled taut. But then, unexpectedly, he took a step back. I don't want to see you like this, he said, his voice low, the pain still there, raw and cutting. I don't want to remember you as someone who's just broken. I need you to be the person you used to be. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips before I could stop it. The irony of it, the sheer absurdity of what he was asking, it was almost too much to bear. I'm not the person I used to be, Daniel, I said, my voice tight with emotion. And I don't think I ever was. But that's okay. I'm learning to live with that. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off, taking another step toward him. I'm done pretending. I'm done wearing the mask of the mother you wanted me to be. I can't give you what you want, Daniel. I can't be perfect for you. I can only be real. I could see his mind working, the conflict in his eyes. For a moment, it seemed like he might break, might let me in again. But then his face hardened, his eyes cold. I don't know if I can accept this version of you, he said quietly. I don't know if I want to. I let the silence stretch, taking a breath, centering myself in the chaos of my emotions. I wasn't here to beg him to accept me. I wasn't here to fix our broken relationship. I was here to give him the freedom to make his own choices, just as I had finally given myself the freedom to make mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter from my mother. His eyes widened when he saw it. This, I said, holding it out to him, is the last of the lies. My mother wrote this to me years ago. She made me believe that I was nothing but a failure, that I could never live up to her expectations. But I don't need this letter anymore. I'm not carrying it around anymore. And neither should you. I pressed it into his hands. It's time to let go of everything that has been holding us back. You don't have to forgive me. You don't have to love me. But you do have to stop living in the past. His fingers closed around the letter, his face unreadable. And then, for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something resembling understanding in his eyes. Something that made me believe that, maybe, just maybe, we could both heal from the damage we had caused each other. You don't need me to be the mother you wanted, I said softly. You need me to be the person I've finally become. He didn't answer. But as I turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of peace settle inside me. The rain had stopped. And I had finally stopped running. It was over. And it was just beginning. The rain had long stopped, but the air still held a chill. The world outside felt as though it had been freshly cleansed, scrubbed raw and clean by the storm, just like me. I stood outside Daniel's door for a long moment, my hands trembling not with fear but with a sense of quiet finality. I hadn't expected forgiveness, not in that moment, not from him. I had learned that redemption didn't come in the form of apologies or declarations of love. It came in the form of acceptance, the kind I had to give myself before I could ever expect it from anyone else. As I walked away from Daniel's apartment, the weight of the letter still in my pocket, I felt something shift inside me. There was no grand revelation, no epiphany that changed everything in an instant. It wasn't like a scene from a movie, where the sun breaks through the clouds and everything falls into place. No, it was quieter than that. Subtle, almost imperceptible. It was the sensation of something finally being laid to rest, of the ghosts I had carried with me for years being allowed to sleep. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into the rain weeks ago. I wasn't the same woman who had stood at my mother's door, locked out, emotionally shattered. I wasn't the woman who had demanded control from her son, from the people around her, because deep down, she was afraid of losing them, of losing herself. That woman had died with my mother, with the years of manipulation and resentment that had poisoned everything I thought I knew about love and family. The woman who walked away from Daniel's apartment was something new. Something more powerful, more liberated. I had given myself the freedom to face the truth of who I was, even if that truth was uncomfortable. And in that, I had found a strength I had never known I had. I drove aimlessly for hours, the roads leading me through the city as though they, too, were trying to find their own path. I didn't have a destination in mind, not yet. But that wasn't important anymore. What mattered was that I had taken the first step toward rebuilding, toward reclaiming my life, not for anyone else, but for myself. I stopped at a park on the outskirts of town, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the sun beginning to dip beneath the horizon. The world felt still, as though everything had exhaled in unison. I sat on a bench, the cold evening air on my face, and I let the silence surround me. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It wasn't the peace of having everything fixed, of having everything fall into place. It was a deeper kind of peace, the kind that comes from accepting the broken pieces of your past and deciding to move forward anyway. I thought about Daniel, and a pang of sadness tightened my chest. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. There was no magic fix for the damage we had done to each other, no simple apology that could undo the years of mistakes. But I also knew that what mattered was not what had happened in the past, but how we chose to move forward. Daniel wasn't the same person he had been when we last spoke. And neither was I. I wasn't asking him to forgive me. I wasn't asking him to accept me, at least not right away. But I had given him the choice, the freedom to make his own decisions. That, in itself, was a victory. And me? I had done something I never thought I could do. I had let go. Of my mother's expectations, of the toxic grip I had on my son, of the need for control. I had finally stopped trying to manipulate the narrative and, for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to face the consequences of my actions, to acknowledge my failures without hiding from them. The path to redemption was long, and it was anything but clear. But I had taken the first step. And in that moment, I knew it was enough. Weeks passed. Daniel didn't reach out, and I didn't expect him to. But I felt a strange calm as I went about my life, knowing that I had done what I needed to do. I had released him from the weight of my expectations. He could walk his own path now, as I was walking mine. And, if I was lucky, maybe one day, our paths would cross again. I returned to my mother's house, the house that had once felt like a prison. But now, it felt like an open space, a place where I could finally breathe. I went through her things, her old letters, her jewelry, the remnants of a life she had built, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of her control over me. I felt a strange sense of freedom, as though the ghosts of the past had finally let me go. The house no longer felt like a monument to my failures. It was just a house. A place. I sold it. The house, the memories, everything. I didn't need them anymore. I had learned that I could stand on my own, that I didn't need to hold on to the past in order to move forward. I didn't need to keep repeating the same mistakes. I could forge my own path, without the shadow of my mother or my son hanging over me. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a quick fix. But it was mine. I met new people, forged new relationships. I didn't expect them to be perfect. But they were real. And I was real with them, for the first time in my life. I learned to trust, to open up, to give and receive without the fear of losing myself in the process. And Daniel? We didn't speak again for a long time. But I knew that he, too, was learning to live without me, and maybe, just maybe, he was finding his own peace. I hoped for that. Not for my sake, but for his. He deserved to be free from the weight of our past. And maybe, in time, we could find a way back to each other. But that was no longer my responsibility. I had finally learned what it meant to be free. Free from the expectations, the guilt, the need for control. Free from the ghosts of my past. And with that freedom, I had found something I never thought I'd have again, peace. I walked away from the past, from the mistakes, from the betrayals. And I never looked back. Because, for the first time in my life, I was walking forward. And that was enough. I didn't realize how much I had been holding my breath until I let it go. The stillness in the days after Daniel's departure from my life was almost unbearable, a quiet that clung to everything, as if the world itself was waiting for something. But something inside me shifted, deep and unshakable. I didn't know exactly what had changed, but I could feel it. The change wasn't external. It wasn't about fixing anything or finding immediate resolution with Daniel. It was an internal, visceral change, like the deep breath after a long, suffocating silence. The house, the silence, it was mine now. But it wasn't just about a property, it was about space, about breathing room. For the first time, I could exist without fear of being watched, judged, or suffocated by someone else's expectations. The walls no longer seemed to close in on me, instead, they were wide, welcoming, and filled with the weight of every decision I had made and all the ones I had avoided. I stopped going to the bars. I stopped running, stopped seeking solace in numbness. I realized, with a strange clarity, that I didn't need distractions anymore. I didn't need to escape myself. I needed to learn to be alone, to be content with my own company. When I woke up each day, I no longer felt the heavy weight of the past pulling me down. There was no longer the pressing need to fix things with Daniel, no desire to rehash old wounds. I wasn't waiting for an apology, and I wasn't expecting one. I had come to terms with my own shortcomings. The question wasn't whether Daniel would forgive me, it was whether I could forgive myself. And that's where the true transformation began. Every moment of my life, I had been someone else's creation, my mother's, Daniel's, even society's. The rules I followed were never my own. The love I gave, the love I demanded, were twisted by my need for control, my fear of abandonment. I had been the puppeteer, pulling strings, weaving lies, but in the end, it was the strings that had bound me. I had lived in a cycle of manipulation, but now that cycle was broken. I could feel the threads unraveling, and it wasn't frightening, it was liberating. I found the courage to go through my mother's things. Her clothes, her old letters, her perfume bottles, her meticulous records, her life, preserved in boxes and drawers. And for the first time, I didn't feel resentment. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the suffocating weight of her love. I saw her for who she was, a flawed woman, just like me, doing her best in a world that demanded too much. I couldn't change the past, couldn't rewrite what had happened between us, but I could change how I let it define me. I held on to a few things, small, sentimental items, and I let go of the rest. I didn't need to keep everything. Her legacy didn't have to be my burden. I sold the house. It wasn't about the house itself, but what it represented, the years of power dynamics, of emotional manipulation, of guilt and unspoken expectations. It was the final severing of the ties that had kept me tethered to her, to a version of myself I no longer recognized. The house was a cage, and I wasn't going to stay in it any longer. When I walked through the front door for the last time, it felt like a release. It wasn't a dramatic, heart-wrenching goodbye. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what had been, and what no longer needed to be. There were no tears. Only a strange, empty peace. In the weeks that followed, I started to carve out a life for myself. It wasn't perfect. There were days when the loneliness crept in, when I could feel the gnawing ache of regret and loss. But it wasn't the overwhelming flood it used to be. I had learned to sit with it, to breathe through it, without the constant urge to escape. I started volunteering at a local charity, helping women who were going through their own struggles, relationships, divorces, grief. In those moments, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had suffered from the weight of expectations. But unlike me, they hadn't yet learned to set themselves free. I helped them find their voices, their power. And in doing so, I found mine again. One evening, weeks after I'd left the house behind, I was sitting at the cafe, sipping my tea, when I saw a familiar face across the room. Daniel. He looked older, thinner, like a man who had been through too much too quickly. He hadn't seen me yet, but I recognized the hesitance in his posture, the way his eyes searched the room, darting from face to face. I didn't go to him. Instead, I let him come to me. He hesitated at first, unsure if he should approach. But when he did, I saw the walls between us starting to crack. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice full of uncertainty, but also something else. Something softer. "Hi, Daniel," I said, my tone steady, calm. He sat down, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his cup. We were two strangers, sitting across from one another, trying to navigate the space between us. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began. "About how you're trying to change, about how you were wrong. And I get it. I really do. I didn't realize how much of it was me, too. I never really gave you a chance to change, to fix things." I nodded, allowing the words to sink in. This wasn't forgiveness, this wasn't the resolution I had once hoped for, where everything would be magically fixed. But it was progress. It was a crack in the wall, a glimpse of the possibility for healing. "I'm not asking for anything from you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I just want you to know that I'm not that woman anymore. The one who tried to control everything. I don't know what happens next, but I don't need you to be anything for me anymore, Daniel. Not even your forgiveness." He looked at me, his expression softening. "I don't know what's next either," he said. "But I think we can figure it out. Together. Maybe." The silence between us wasn't filled with the tension it once had. It was peaceful, uncertain, but full of potential. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. We didn't fix everything that day. We didn't make promises or declarations. But we started from a place of mutual understanding, not out of obligation or guilt, but from a quiet, empowered truth. I had learned to let go of the need to control, to fix, to be perfect. I had stopped being the victim of my past, stopped holding on to the chains of resentment, of guilt. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was mine to walk, and for the first time, I felt like I could walk it with my head held high. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I wasn't perfect, but I was real. I was free. And in that freedom, I found my strength. I had learned to stop looking back. And for the first time, I was finally ready to move forward.